I have lived in this house longer than I ever lived anywhere else, longer even than the years I shared with my husband before his passing. 12 years of widowhood have left me with an odd intimacy, with its corners, its creaks, its seasons. At 68, I wake with the sun slipping past the old oak. Outside the kitchen window, the same oak my husband's grandfather planted when the farmhouse was young. Its roots reach deeper than any of our arguments ever did, and its branches stretch over the roof like a guardian's hand. I prepared supper slowly that evening, laying out the familiar china, polishing the silver I only brought out when family came home. Maricela had flown in from San Francisco for a brief visit, or so I thought. She used to call me Mama in the soft way children do, but years in corporate boardrooms had sharpened her tone into clipped syllables. Still, I hoped for warmth, a thread of the little girl I once carried on my hip. She arrived late, her phone pressed to her ear, her suitcase dropped in the hallway as if the house were a hotel. I tried to catch her eye to coax a smile, but she brushed past, still talking business. When she finally sat across from me at the dinner table, the candles flickering between us, her gaze was all steel and calculation. We ate in near silence until the sound of her glass striking the wood jolted me. It wasn't an accident. The thud of crystal on oak was deliberate, like a gavel. Maricela leaned forward, her words landing heavy. "Mom, you have 48 hours to move out. The deed is mine now." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. I searched her face for a joke, a crack in the mask, but there was nothing. My fork hovered midair, my appetite gone. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Words failed me. After a lifetime of giving, I found myself emptied by a single sentence. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I only lowered my eyes to the plate I had carefully prepared and felt the years of labor, love, and sacrifice dissolve under her decree. The rest of the meal passed in silence, punctuated only by her phone buzzing on the table. When she finally retreated upstairs to the guest room, I moved through the house alone. My hands traced the edges of door frames, the cool plaster walls I had repainted after my husband's death, each surface carrying memory like an old photograph. In the kitchen, I rested my palm against the wall beside the stove, seeking comfort from the solid wood. That was when I felt the shift, the faintest give under my touch. Curious, I pressed harder and found a board loose at the seam. The house had revealed secrets before old nails a child's marble, but never anything like this. I pried gently, my breath catching, and behind the panel, my fingers brushed against a sealed envelope, browned with age but intact. My husband's handwriting leapt at me, steady, even in its fading ink, open. "Only if anyone ever tries to take the house from you." My knees weakened, and I clutched the counter for balance. He had known. In some way, he had foreseen this moment, my daughter's coldness, the threat to the home we had poured our lives into. I didn't open it. Not yet. My hands shook as I slid the board back into place and carried the envelope upstairs. In my bedroom, I placed it carefully into the drawer of my nightstand, as though it were fragile glass. Lying awake beneath the weight of silence, I listened to the oak tree's branches scrape the roof and felt my pulse quicken. Something waited inside those pages. Something that could not be rushed. The envelope sat in the drawer, humming like a secret heartbeat, while I stared at the ceiling and knew the next day would demand more strength than I had ever shown before. The night after Maricela's words, the farmhouse seemed to echo them back at me. Every corner, every room I entered, whispered the ultimatum: 48 hours, 48 hours. I lay awake, listening to the old house breathe around me, its wood shifting in the September. Cool, the branches of the oak brushing the shingles in slow rhythm. This house had never been cruel to me. Only the voices within it could wound. I rose early the dawn, pale against the curtains, and went about my routines as though life had not been upended. I boiled water for tea, buttered toast, and sat at the scarred oak table where both of my daughters had once scattered crayons and schoolbooks. The memory of their small hands smudging paper with bright colors carried me backward into the years when I thought this house would always be a refuge, no matter what storms battered us outside. When my husband died, the walls sagged with grief. There were leaks in the roof that first winter, and I climbed the ladder alone, patching shingles, while snow drifted into my sleeves. I painted walls with my own hands, layer after layer, until the smell of latex paint became the scent of survival. Each corner bore the mark of my effort. Every nail I drove into the wood felt like a promise to my children. You will not lose this home. 5 years ago, when the tax bill arrived like a guillotine, it nearly undid me. Maricela had been in trouble. Then her business venture on the edge of collapse. She called with a trembling voice, asking for help. I drained nearly all of my retirement savings to pay off both her debts and the overdue property taxes that threatened the house. I told myself it was for family, that sacrifice was love. I imagined she would remember that gratitude would linger like the scent of lilacs in spring. But gratitude has a short half-life. Maricela moved on quickly. Her visits rare, her phone calls rushed. I watched her life in San Francisco unfold, only through clipped social media posts, her sharp dresses, her new car, the conferences where she stood on glossy stages. Meanwhile, I swept the porch, mended the fence, and pressed bills into envelopes each month. And now that same daughter had looked across my dinner table and declared ownership as though I were a tenant overstaying my welcome. Outwardly, I had kept my composure, lowering my eyes, letting her mistake silence for surrender. Inwardly, the betrayal struck bone. I walked through the rooms that morning, letting my hand trail over the furniture I had chosen, the photographs arranged on mantels. Here was my younger daughter's graduation picture, smiling in a cap and gown before life pulled her too far from home. Here was the armchair my husband had napped in, worn thin at the elbows. And in the upstairs hallway, sunlight glinting against the frame, the photo of Maricela at 12, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a ribbon from the county spelling bee. How could the same girl become the woman who now measured love in deeds and signatures? I considered what she had demanded. To pack my belongings into boxes, to step away quietly, to vanish like a guest who had overstayed. There was a weary part of me tempted by that thought, to let go, to find a small apartment in town, to free myself of this endless struggle. But the envelope hidden in my nightstand pulsed in my mind. The words scrawled across it, "Open only if anyone ever tries to take the house from you," were like a lifeline thrown across years. I returned to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the drawer. The envelope lay there, its paper yellowed, the seal intact. My husband's steady handwriting, both comfort and burden. I traced the letters with my fingertip. Proof might lie inside. A shield, a map, or at least his final instructions. For now, I closed the drawer again. I was not ready, but I knew I would be. The house hummed around me, old but steadfast, as though urging me forward toward the truth waiting inside that folded paper. The envelope stayed hidden in my nightstand, but its weight pressed against me all morning, as though the wood itself could not contain it. I tried distracting myself with small chores, watering the potted geraniums, dusting the bookshelves, folding laundry, but every quiet moment drew me back to the drawer. By noon, I could not carry the burden alone any longer. I called Claudine Renshaw. We had shared a desk in the children's wing of the Burlington Library decades ago, shelving picture books side by side. Claudine had since gone on to law school, built a career, and retired only recently, though she still kept her license active. Her voice came through the receiver, brisk, no nonsense, but warm beneath the surface. "Evelyn," she said, "you sound thinner than paper. Tell me what's happened." The words poured from me. I told her of the dinner, of Maricella's cold decree, of the silence I kept, because I didn't know what else to do. Claudine listened, her breathing steady, as though anchoring me to the earth. When I mentioned the envelope, she cut in sharply. "Don't rush. First open it. Then let me see the deed you have on file. We'll line the pieces up. Paperwork doesn't lie, Evelyn, people do." Her confidence steadied me. I promised to bring both envelope and deed to her tomorrow. She ended the call with the same firmness she used to end story time at the library. "Get some rest tonight, and don't let your daughter bully you with deadlines." Later, as the sun fell behind the oak, I stepped outside to breathe. The crisp air carried the smell of leaves beginning to rot sweetly on the ground. Across the lane, I saw Mr. Olin working on his shed, hammer in hand. His back was bent with years of carpentry, but his arms were still strong, and his smile when he spotted me was immediate. "You look troubled, Evelyn," he said, wiping his brow. I hesitated, then told him only part of the story, that Maricela wanted the house, that she had demanded I leave. His face darkened, and he set the hammer aside. "Your Walter told me once, right under that oak, that this place would always be yours. Not the girls', not anyone else's. Yours. He said you'd kept it alive when he was too sick to. I never forgot that." His words were a balm I hadn't known I needed. I thanked him, swallowing against the sudden tightness in my throat. As I turned back toward the porch, I found Mrs. Gertrude waiting at the gate, her cane tapping against the stones. She had been my neighbor for 4 decades, watching over my girls like a stern aunt when they were small. I overheard she admitted, unapologetic, "That daughter of yours has no right to treat you so. This house is as much yours as your own breath. I remember Walter telling me once, clear as day, 'If anything happens to me, Gertrude, you remind Evelyn this house belongs to her.'" I felt my cheeks burn, half with gratitude, half with shame. It embarrassed me to have others glimpse the rift inside my family. Yet their certainty, their memories carried more strength than I could summon alone. That night, sitting by the lamp in the living room, I thought of my friend's words, Claudine's calm pragmatism, Olin's steadfast memory, Gertrude's sharp insistence, all of them pointing me back to what I already suspected. Walter had left me more than love. He had left me the right to remain. Still, I couldn't shake the ache of humiliation. To need neighbors to remind me of my worth, to hear them condemn my daughter's cruelty, felt like exposing a bruise too tender to touch. I wanted to protect Maricela's image, even as she stripped me of my dignity. I rose, went upstairs, and opened the nightstand drawer. The envelope weighted its edges rough against my fingertips. My friends believed they knew the truth. Tomorrow, I would have to see if Walter's handwriting agreed with them. The next morning, I carried the envelope to the kitchen table as though it were a living thing, fragile and heavy at once. I set it down beside my teacup and sat staring at it, the seal unbroken. My husband's handwriting steady across the front. My hands trembled as I reached for the letter opener. It had been 12 years since his death, and yet seeing his script again was like hearing his voice through a closed door. I slipped the blade beneath the flap and pulled gently. The paper tore with a whisper. Inside was a folded sheet thick with age and a second document notarized, stamped, and unmistakably official. My eyes first fell upon the letter in his hand. "Evelyn," it began, "if you are reading this, then the house we built is being threatened. I want you to know it was always meant for you. You held it together when I faltered. You paid the bills when I could not, painted the walls when my strength failed, and kept our girls safe when illness kept me from the world. This house is yours, not as a gift, but as recognition of what you gave." Tears blurred the words, and I paused, clutching the page to my chest. I breathed in, steadying myself, and unfolded the second paper. It was a will notarized 3 years before his death. The language was clear. Upon my passing, I leave the Burlington property, including the farmhouse and surrounding land, to my wife Eveline Moreau. Sole heir. Full rights. Transfer not to children until her death or written consent. I read it twice then, a third time, each word like iron, driven into the foundation beneath me. There was no ambiguity. The farmhouse passed directly to me. Not to Maricela, not to anyone else. For a moment I could not move. The relief came first, rushing through me like water through a burst dam. But behind it came confusion, and then a rising anger. If this will existed, if it was notarized and filed, how could Maricela claim ownership so boldly? She must have known, or at least she believed she had something stronger. A memory surfaced. Walter, sitting on the porch one late summer evening, his voice gravelly from medication. He had held my hand, squeezed it hard enough that I looked him straight in the eye. "Paper can be forged," he said. "Keep truth close." At the time, I thought he meant Bill's bank accounts, the ordinary mess of life. Now I saw he had been warning me. I spread both documents on the table, the letter and the will side by side. The official seal glinted faintly under the morning light. A wave of strength rose in me. Walter had not left me unprotected. He had trusted me to defend what was rightfully mine. I pressed my palm flat against the papers, whispering aloud, though no one could hear, "Thank you, my love." Yet even as I sat straighter, the questions gnawed. Why had Maricela looked so certain, so unshakable? What deed or paper had she found or created that made her believe she could toss me aside with 48 hours' notice? I gathered the documents carefully, slid them into a fresh envelope and tucked them into my handbag. Claudine would know what to do next. The truth was on my side, but the battle had only begun. When I rose from the table, the house seemed to stand taller around me, as though the very walls had heard Walter's words and remembered their purpose. I carried his letter with me upstairs, each step a drumbeat of resolve, already thinking of what I must uncover to understand how my daughter had come to believe she owned what was never hers. Claudine wasted no time when I placed the documents in her hands. She adjusted her glasses, read the letter twice, then smoothed the notarized will flat against her desk. The small office smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish, the same way the library once had. "This is solid," she said, tapping the seal with her pen. "But if Maricela's marching around claiming ownership, she's standing on some sort of paper. We need to know what it is." Her words chilled me. I had been so consumed by the betrayal itself that I hadn't asked how my daughter had come to believe she had power at all. Claudine picked up her phone, calling a colleague at the county clerk's office. I sat rigid, my hands folded tight in my lap as she exchanged brisk words, her tone sharpening like a blade. When she hung up, her face was grim. "Eveline, your daughter, filed a quitclaim deed after Walter's death. She signed your name, claimed you relinquished rights to her." I felt the air leave me. Forgery. My own child tracing my name with false ink. I saw her as a girl again, perched at the kitchen table, tongue between her teeth, as she practiced cursive on lined paper. The loops and curves had once made me smile with pride. Now the thought that she had weaponized my handwriting made my stomach turn. Claudine leaned forward. "It's fraud, yes, but here's the danger: you never contested it. So on the books, the deed shows her as the owner." I sat back, dizzy, clutching my handbag for balance. How could I contest what I didn't know existed? "She counted on that," Claudine said softly. I left her office, shaken the envelope with Walter's will pressed to my chest like armor. At home, I brewed tea and sat at the table, staring into the steam as though it could tell me the future. My daughter hadn't simply thrown careless words at me. She had plotted. She had filed papers, waited years, and chosen her moment. The depth of the betrayal hollowed me out. Later that evening, as dusk fell through the windows, I overheard voices outside the gate. I stepped onto the porch and froze. Maricela was there, speaking briskly to a tall man in a navy suit. His shoes shone, even in the dim light, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone used to buying and selling lives as though they were furniture. They didn't see me. I stayed in the shadows, listening. Maricela's voice was sharp, impatient. The sale should be finalized by next Friday. I've already cleared the place. The man, Jonas Kettering, I heard her call him, nodded. Your mother won't fight it. She won't dare, Maricela said. She's old, she'll fold. 48 hours and she's gone. The words slid into me like knives. I stepped back into the house before they could turn and spot me. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling their voices, but my ears still rang with them. Maricela wasn't just claiming the house, she was selling it out from under me. Within days, strangers would walk across my floors, tear down the curtains, rip out the soul of everything Walter and I had built. I pressed my palms against the kitchen table, steadying myself. My fight was no longer against a daughter's cruelty alone. It was against a transaction already in motion, a buyer waiting with pen in hand. The envelope in my handbag seemed to throb with urgency. Walter had left me the truth. Now I had to decide how to wield it before the gavel of sale fell and erased me entirely. The night after overhearing Maricela and that investor at the gate, I did not sleep. My thoughts beat against one another, like wings in a cage. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. If she wanted to strip me of this home, she would not strip me of the pieces of myself I had poured into it. I fetched a roll of masking tape and a stack of sticky notes from the drawer in the hall. Moving room to room, I began the quiet labor of marking what was mine. In the living room, I pressed a tag onto the base of the sofa. I had bought it with my first Social Security check after Walter died, saving for months until I could afford something sturdy. I remembered the ache in my back from sleeping on the old broken couch for too long, and the satisfaction of watching the delivery men set this one down. The television carried its own story. Purchased with a Christmas bonus from the library when I had still been working part-time shelving books to keep afloat. I placed a note on its back. Next to it, the rug woven in Vermont paid for in installments. Each item carried a memory of sacrifice, of doing without, so that something better could stand in its place. Upstairs, I opened drawers and closets, stacking receipts in neat piles. I kept them all, years' worth of thin slips, folded into envelopes, proof of the overtime shifts, the scrimped savings, the vacations never taken. The washer in the basement bore a note, the curtains in the dining room another. Even the dining chairs bought after Walter's death, when the old set collapsed beneath me, received their claim. By mid-afternoon, the house was a map of my labor, each note a reminder that I had built this home piece by piece, even after loss tried to hollow me out. My hands shook from fatigue, but my resolve grew steadier with every tag. The phone rang often that day. Maricela's name flashed across the screen again and again. I let it buzz itself into silence each time. If she wanted to hear my voice tremble, she would not have the satisfaction. Silence became my shield. That evening, I called Claudine. I explained what I was doing, the notes, the receipts, the inventory of my sacrifices. She listened without interrupting, then spoke firmly. Good. Keep going. We'll need proof, Evelyn. Receipts, witnesses, a record of every cent. We'll also need courage. This isn't just about paper. It's about standing in a room and refusing to bow. Her words settled over me like a mantle. Proof, witnesses, courage. I had the first. The neighbors perhaps could be the second. And as for courage, I would find it even if it meant scraping it together from the marrow of my bones. When the phone rang again that night, I stood at the window watching the oak sway in the dark. I didn't move to answer. The silence stretched, and in that silence I felt something shift. My daughter believed I would break quickly fold under her ultimatum. But silence can be stronger than any shouted protest. It unnerves it, unsettles, it waits. I returned to the table, sorted the receipts into folders, and labeled them by year. The stack grew taller, a paper monument to my endurance. I smoothed the top folder with my hand, steady at last, and thought of the investor's voice asking if I would fight. He would have his answer soon enough. By the time the clock struck midnight, every room had been accounted for. I sat in the stillness, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of the curtains in the night breeze. Around me, the house felt less like a target and more like a fortress. The silence was no longer a retreat, it was the beginning of my defense. And when the phone rang once more, its screen glowing in the dark, I let it ring out again, already knowing the next move would not come from her, but from me. As the folders of receipts grew taller on my dining table, so too did the weight of memory. Each slip of paper brought back not just the money I had spent, but the choices I had made. Choices that always seemed to tilt in Maricela's favor, though I had not wanted to admit it before. Walter used to say I was the steady one. He told me that steadiness was a kind of strength, the soil from which everything else could grow. But to Maricela, he gave a different kind of praise. "You're ambitious," he'd say, ruffling her hair when she was still young enough to tolerate it. "You'll go far." I stood beside him, smiling, though part of me felt how unevenly the light fell across our daughters. My younger girl, Alma, rarely received such words. She was quiet, artistic, and shy happiest when sketching in the barn or playing the old piano. Walter loved her. I know he did, but his voice softened most when he spoke of Maricela's bright future. After Alma died, taken in a car accident that shattered us all, what remained between Maricela and me grew complicated. I clung to her, terrified of losing my only surviving child. She pulled away, determined to be untethered. Perhaps my grip only pushed her farther. Now sitting alone in the kitchen, I wondered if my fear of losing her had blinded me to who she had become. Perhaps I had excused too much, forgiven too easily, and left doors open for her to betray me in ways Alma never could have imagined. The phone rang again that afternoon, and this time it was Claudine. Her tone was sharper than usual, brisk with purpose. "I've confirmed it," she said. "Your daughter filed a quitclaim deed 6 years ago, just after Walter's death. The signature on it is yours, or rather, her imitation of yours." The words stung like nettles. I pressed my palm against the counter to steady myself. "She forged my name," "Yes," Claudine replied, "and it passed through unnoticed because no one contested it. By law, she appears as the owner on record. It's fraud, Evelyn, plain and simple." I let silence fill the line. Forgery. My daughter had stolen not just my trust, but my very name. I thought of her as a girl again, bent over her homework at this same table, asking me how to curl the letters just right in cursive. She had learned well too well. The thought twisted inside me like a knife. Claudine's voice softened. "This strengthens our case. Once we prove forgery, the quitclaim deed is void. The will you hold will stand. But it won't be easy. Maricela will fight back." I wanted to believe my heart was stone, that anger alone would drive me forward. Yet even as I nodded, tears blurred my vision. This was my child, my only living child. However cruel she had become, however cold she was, the baby I had held through fevers, the girl I had braided hair for on school mornings, the young woman I had hugged tightly when Alma's coffin was lowered into the ground. I whispered into the receiver more to myself than to Claudine. "How does a mother fight her daughter?" Claudine answered without hesitation, "By protecting the truth." When I ended the call, the house seemed to exhale around me as though it had heard and approved. I walked to the hallway where family photographs lined the wall. There was Walter, beaming beside Maricela at her college graduation. There was Alma, holding her sketchbook, half smile, shy but luminous. And there was me, always at the edge of the frame, steady and unshaken. For the first time, I saw the cracks in those images, the favoritism I had ignored, the way ambition had been watered, while steadiness had merely been expected. The truth hurt, but it also braced me. Forgery was not ambition, it was theft. And no matter how deep my love ran, I could not let my daughter erase me. I returned to the dining table, stacked the folders neatly, and slid Walter's will on top. The paper was cool beneath my hand, solid as bedrock. The next step was clear. It was no longer just about keeping the house, it was about facing my daughter in the light of law and truth. It surprised me how quickly the whispers began. Burlington was no city for secrets, not in our neighborhood, where everyone knew who shoveled whose sidewalk and which gardens bloomed late in spring. By the time I walked to the post office that week, I could feel eyes on me, soft with pity, sharp with indignation. Mrs. Gertrude stopped me first. She leaned against her cane at the corner where the maples flamed red, her chin tilted with that old school teacher sternness. I heard what your Maricela's been saying. She told me, voice low but firm. This house has your fingerprints, Evelyn, not hers. Don't you let anyone forget it. I swallowed, throat tight. It was one thing for me to feel the betrayal. It was another to know others saw it too. My shame flared, but behind it came a steady warmth. They remembered. They had watched. That afternoon, Mr. Olin came by with his tool belt still around his waist. I recall you paying me after Walter's illness, he said, scratching his beard. Out of your own pocket. Roof repairs, porch rails, that new gutter system. I'll put it in writing if you need. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. His words felt like bricks laid beneath my feet, something solid to stand on. Word carried farther. Mrs. Alvarez, who lived across the street, remembered the day the tax collector came with his notice. I saw you crying on the porch, she said gently, handing me a jar of preserves. And the next week, I saw you walk into the clerk's office with a check. That was you, not her. It became clear to me then what Claudine had meant when she spoke of witnesses. Proof wasn't just receipts and ink. It was memory etched into the lives around me. I began gathering statements one by one. Each neighbor signed their name beneath their recollections, steadying my case with the strength of a community that had watched me carry burdens long after Walter was gone. In the evenings, I sat at the dining table sorting these pages into a growing folder. Testimonies stacked beside Walter's will, beside the receipts that traced my sacrifices through the years. Every sheet of paper was a reminder that I had not lived invisibly. Others had seen. Others remembered. The shame that had first wrapped itself around me began to loosen. Where I had once felt exposed, now I felt shielded. Their voices created a chorus that Maricela could not silence. Still, the ache of betrayal pulsed beneath it all. To stand in the grocery store and hear hushed voices say, "Such arrogance after all her mother did," was a strange comfort and a sorrow both. I never wanted my daughter's name carried like that, but she had set the tone herself. One evening, as the sun lowered beyond the oak, Mrs. Gertrude stopped at my porch again. She placed her hand over mine where it rested on the railing. "You're not alone in this, Evelyn. The whole street knows the truth. Let us carry it with you." I felt tears rise, though I held them back. To be seen, to be defended, it restored something I thought I had lost. That night, I filed the signed statements carefully into the folder and placed it beside my bed. When I turned out the light, the house felt less empty, less vulnerable. It no longer stood on my shoulders alone. It stood on the memories of all who had witnessed what I gave. And as I drifted toward sleep, I knew that when Maricela returned, she would find more than her mother waiting. She would find a town that had already chosen its side. The 48 hours arrived like a drumbeat I could hear, even in my sleep. Maricella's ultimatum had ticked down to its final morning. But instead of boxes stacked in hallways or bags waiting by the door, my house stood as it always had, except for the markers of what was mine. At dawn, I called the movers. They were a local outfit, Green Mountain hauling men who knew these streets and knew me by name. When they arrived in their rumbling truck, I met them at the porch with my list in hand. Everything tagged, I told them. Nothing else leaves this house. They nodded without question. Together we moved piece by piece, the sofa carried carefully through the doorway, the washer strapped tight, the television wrapped in thick blankets. My curtains came down folded neatly and slipped into a box. Each item that left felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had almost allowed to be stolen. By mid-afternoon, the house looked strange. Rooms echoed with a hollowness, their corners bare, their silence stark. But instead of emptiness, I felt clarity. What remained were only bones and walls. What Walter had left me, what no one could strip without tearing down the whole of it. I kept the folder of receipts and statements close, stacked neatly on the kitchen counter beside Walter's letter. Proof, witness, courage, all of it waiting. The sound of tires on gravel reached me just as the movers pulled away with the last load. I stepped to the front window and saw Maricella's car pull into the drive, sleek and shining, her suitcase tumbling from the trunk. She strode to the porch with heels clicking, already talking on her phone, already assuming victory. She pushed the door open without knocking. Her eyes swept the living room, and she froze. The sofa was gone. The rug was gone. The television was gone. Only the hardwood remained bare and unadorned. Her voice cracked with outrage. "What have you done, Mother?" I stood in the doorway to the kitchen, steady as the oak outside. I took what was mine. Her face flushed red disbelief, twisting her features. She marched from room to room, yanking doors wide, staring into the emptiness where once had stood everything she had ignored for years. The curtains, the chairs, where is everything, she demanded. I followed slowly, my hands folded before me. Paid for with my wages, my savings, my years. You wanted the house, Maricela. Then you can have only the house. The rest I carried. She spun toward me, anger sharp enough to cut. This is my property. You had no right, I cut her off gently, my voice calm. I had every right. You contributed nothing to what filled these rooms. You left me to keep it alive alone. And now you see what that means. For the first time, her confidence faltered. She looked at the bare floorboards as though the truth had been written across them. Her suitcase sat abandoned at the threshold, useless in a house she suddenly realized was no home. I turned back toward the kitchen, letting silence carry the weight of my words. Behind me, she stood still, her phone pressed uselessly in her hand, her mouth opening and closing without sound. When I reached the counter, I placed my hand over the folder of documents. Proof of all I had given, all she had tried to erase. My strength no longer wavered. And as I listened to her heels strike the floor again, more frantic now, I knew this was only the beginning of her reckoning. Claudine moved swiftly once she saw the forged quitclaim deed. Within days, she had filed the paperwork to challenge it, her voice cutting through the courthouse air like a bell. Fraudulent transfer, she said, signed in another's name. We ask for immediate action to void it. Watching her argue for me was like watching someone strike flint sparks, sharp and certain. I clutched Walter's will in my lap as though it were scripture. Still, a part of me feared it would not be enough. Maricela was cunning. She had prepared her moves for years. My folder of receipts, my neighbor's written statements. My silence turned into strength. All of it was solid. But in court, solid sometimes bends under pressure. Then Mr. Olin knocked on my door one afternoon, cap in hand, his shoulders hunched as though carrying a secret too long. He asked to sit, and I poured us both coffee. For a while, we only listened to the ticking of the clock and the rustle of the oak tree's leaves against the window. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been keeping something," he said. "Didn't know if I should, but I reckon now's the time." He pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket, its surface scratched with years of wear. My breath caught. He pressed play. Walter's voice filled the room, rough but clear, carried on the wind from some summer evening long ago. "This house belongs to Evelyn. Always will. If anyone ever tries to claim otherwise, you tell them they're wrong. She's the one who kept it standing." My hands shook, and I covered my mouth. The sound of his voice alive again cut through me like a blade, but steadied me all the same. Mr. Olin paused the recording, his eyes moist. "He said it to me under that oak tree," he explained. "Asked me to keep a record just in case. I didn't think it'd come to this. But Walter, he knew things could get messy. He wanted you protected." I reached for his hand, gripping it tight. "He trusted you. He trusted you more," Olin replied gently. "That's why he left the words with me to circle back to you when the time was right." Claudine's face lit with fierce satisfaction when I told her. "This," she said, "tapping the recorder isn't just sentiment. It's corroboration. A husband's testimony of intent given to a neighbor he trusted. A judge will weigh that heavily." For the first time since Maricella's ultimatum, I felt the ground beneath me solid as bedrock. Not only had Walter left me the will, but he had also left echoes of his voice in the hands of another proof stronger than forged ink. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the oak whisper against the roof, and pressed the recorder to my heart. Walter had thought ahead. He had left truth not only in papers, but in spoken words entrusted to someone who cared enough to keep them safe. When I closed my eyes, the fear that had followed me these weeks seemed to lift, replaced by something heavier, but steadier resolve. And as dawn crept in, I knew Maricela would soon hear her father's voice again, not as memory, but as testimony. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and paper, the kind of place where time seemed to pause, waiting for verdicts to turn it forward again. I sat at the petitioner's table, my hands folded in my lap, my body trembling. Despite the layers of composure I tried to wear like a shawl, Claudine sat beside me, her files stacked neatly, her pen tapping only once before she stilled it with deliberate calm. Across the room, Maricela entered like she was arriving at a board meeting. Her suit was charcoal gray, her heels clicking in perfect rhythm, her hair pinned back with precision. She glanced at me, her mouth curving into a faint smile that wasn't warmth, but warning. Then she leaned close to her attorney, whispering with the confidence of someone certain the scales would tilt her way. When the judge called the case, Claudine rose first. Her voice was clear, practiced, but edged with something personal. She laid out the foundation. Walter's notarized will, naming me sole heir, the community witnesses who had signed statements, the receipts showing my contributions through the years. Then she brought forward Mr. Olin, who carried the small recorder in his hand, as though it were an heirloom. The room quieted as Walter's voice played rough but steady. "This house belongs to Evelyn. Always will." Even the judge leaned forward, his pen stilled above the page. Maricela's attorney rose quickly afterward, spinning words like silk. He painted me as an aging woman clouded by memory, clinging to walls rather than reality. Maricela herself stood to speak her tone, smooth, her eyes occasionally softening in what I knew was a performance. "My mother has been under stress," she said, glancing toward me with a feigned tenderness. "She forgets conversations, misplaces documents. She signed the quitclaim willingly years ago, and now she regrets it. I only want to preserve the property for the family." The words scraped against me like sandpaper. To hear my own child diminish me to confusion, to fragility, it cut deeper than any forged paper. I felt my cheeks burn, shame rising, but I held my head high. Claudine stood again, her rebuttal crisp. She pointed to the inconsistencies in the deed, the handwriting expert's preliminary findings, the fact that the notary listed was long deceased at the time of the signature. She placed the will before the judge slid forward the folder of receipts and gestured toward me with quiet conviction. "This woman is not confused," she said firmly. "She is the one who paid the bills, kept the roof over her family's head, and honored her husband's trust. Her steadiness is not weakness. It is the very reason this home still stands." The courtroom hummed with whispers, spectators shifting, eyes darting between me and Maricela. Some wore skepticism, others something closer to respect. I sat straighter, folding my trembling hands tighter until they stilled. The judge said nothing final that day, only that the matter would require review testimony and further evidence. The gavel struck, and the sound rang through me like both warning and promise. As we rose to leave, Claudine touched my arm gently, steadying me. I looked once more at my daughter, polished, unyielding, and felt the hollowness of the space between us. Yet beneath that ache, a new resolve rooted deeper. For the first time in weeks, I walked out of the courthouse, not as a woman undone, but as one preparing to fight for her dignity. Step by steady step, the next hearing came quicker than I was ready for. Yet waiting had done nothing to quiet the storm inside me. When I stepped into the courtroom again, the air felt heavier, charged with the weight of unfinished truth. Claudine was calm at my side, her briefcase balanced neatly on the table. Across from us, Maricela sat poised, her face composed, though I caught the tightness in her jaw when the clerk called our case. This time, it was not only papers and testimonies. It was voices, questions, and answers laid bare under oath. Maricela was called to the stand. She walked with deliberate steps, chin-high eyes darting briefly toward me before fixing on the judge. When she swore to tell the truth, my heart clenched. Truth had already been a casualty of her choices. Her attorney began gently guiding her to frame her actions as those of a dutiful daughter. "Did you file the deed transfer in question?" "I did," she admitted, her voice steady. "After my father's passing, I felt the property needed to be safeguarded. My mother, she was vulnerable. She didn't always handle finances well. I acted to protect the family assets." The words stung sharper than any insult. Protect, vulnerable, as though I were a burden incapable of tending to what I had carried for decades. I wanted to rise and shout every sacrifice I had made, every sleepless night, patching leaks and paying bills. But I forced myself to sit still, my nails digging into my palms. The opposing attorney leaned closer. "So you signed your mother's name without her consent?" Maricela hesitated, the first crack in her polished facade. "I signed in her stead." It was understood. She would have agreed if she had realized the risks. The judge's brow furrowed. His gavel tapped once softly, more warning than punctuation. "Ms. Moreau," he said, his voice measured, "you do understand that signing another person's name on legal documents without their authorization constitutes forgery." For the first time, I saw her composure falter. Her lips parted, eyes blinking too fast. But she did not look at me. She faced the bench, hands tightening around the wood of the witness stand. "I only meant to keep it safe," she said. "The house, the value, it shouldn't be lost. I didn't think..." But intention could not undo action. The judge's voice cut through the room, firm and unyielding. "Good intentions do not erase criminal acts. This court takes forgery seriously, particularly when it undermines rightful inheritance." I felt my breath release in a slow, trembling exhale. Vindication swelled inside me, undeniable, yet it collided with sorrow so heavy it nearly buckled me. To hear my daughter confess, to watch her try to wrap betrayal in the language of protection, It was victory and grief braided together. She finally turned her eyes to me, then just for a moment. I searched for regret, for a flicker of the child I once held close. All I saw was defiance, laced with fear. The questioning continued, legal language filling the chamber, but I barely heard. My mind replayed her words, the falseness of them, the cold calculation it must have taken to trace my name in ink, not her own. The judge's reprimand echoed in my chest long after he moved on to procedure. By the time the session adjourned, my hands were cold. My heart pulled in two directions. I had fought for truth, and truth was on my side. Yet the cost was my daughter's unraveling before the law, and that cut deeper than any wound she had tried to give me. As Claudine gathered our papers, I pressed Walter's letter to my chest, inside my bag, clinging to the steadiness he had trusted me with. The court had begun to see the truth. Now I had to reckon with the pain of seeing my child exposed by it. News traveled faster than any ruling. By the time I returned from the courthouse that week, Burlington already seemed to know. At the market, 2 women by the produce bins fell silent as I passed. At the bakery, the clerk offered me a free loaf of rye, his eyes soft with a mixture of pity and respect. The whispers weren't cruel. They carried a tone of indignation not against me, but against Maricela. Word of the forgery and her admission under oath rippled through the neighborhood. For years, people had seen me pay bills, repair fences, and shovel snow alone. Now their memories became testimony, and the story they told was clear. My daughter's claim was not just selfish, it was dishonest. Even Jonas Kettering, the investor who had stood at my gate in his polished shoes, retracted his interest. Claudine relayed it with a dry smile. He wants no part in property tainted by fraud. Too much risk to his reputation. I imagined his sharp suit and confident posture deflating as he realized he had bet on the wrong horse. For once, I felt no guilt in picturing his embarrassment. Maricela returned to the house only once after the hearing. She walked down the street with her chin lifted, but the neighbors didn't wave. Mr. Olin turned his back deliberately as he hammered at his shed. Mrs. Gertrude, never one to soften her edges, told her flatly, "Shame is heavy, child. You'll feel it more with every step." I stood on the porch, watching my chest heavy with conflicting tides. A mother wants to shield her child from humiliation, yet another part of me believed she needed to bear it, to learn that choices have weight. Maricela met my eyes across the yard for a fleeting second, but instead of defiance, I saw only fury directed not at herself, but at me for not saving her from the town's judgment. She turned away quickly, her heels striking the pavement harder than necessary. In the weeks that followed, I noticed the shift in how people treated me. At the library, where I still volunteered, a few mornings patrons who had once overlooked me now stopped to chat. At the church hall, hands reached out to steady me as I walked to my pew. Not pity, respect. They had watched me endure quietly for years, and now they saw me not as fragile, but as resilient. I became unwillingly a kind of symbol. Neighbors told each other Evelyn stood her ground. It embarrassed me, but also gave me strength. For so long, I had been afraid my silence meant weakness. Now it seemed others understood it as resolve. Claudine reminded me often, public opinion doesn't decide the court, but it steadies the ground beneath you. And she was right. When I walked through town, I no longer felt invisible. I felt carried by a quiet current of support, one that even Maricela couldn't twist her by. Still, when I lay awake at night, the ache of loss pressed against me. Alma was gone. Walter was gone. And Maricela, though alive, felt further from me than either of them. The house was secure in law and in community memory, but the fracture of family could not be patched with signatures or stamps. One evening, as I closed the curtains, I had taken back from storage and hung. Anew, I looked out at the oak tree standing guard. Its branches swayed in the twilight, steady against the wind. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling both fortified and unsettled. Because while the town had chosen its side, I knew Maricela well enough to understand shame would not be the end of her story. It was late afternoon when she came. I had just finished sweeping the porch, the autumn air crisp against my cheeks, when I heard the sharp click of heels on the path. Maricela appeared at the bottom of the steps, her face pale beneath the powder, her eyes blazing. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stormed past me into the house, the scent of her perfume trailing like smoke after fire. I followed her into the living room, where the bare floorboards still spoke of what I had taken back. She dropped her handbag onto a chair, folded her arms, and faced me as though I were a defendant in her court. "You ruined me," she spat, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "I hope you're happy, Mother. I had everything lined up. The sale, the future. Now I'm a laughingstock in town. Do you understand what you've done?" Her words cut, though not in the way she intended. I saw the little girl she had once been, flushed and furious when she lost a game, blaming anyone but herself. Yet now it was not a game, but a life she had gambled with mine, most of all. I straightened, though my throat felt tight. "I didn't ruin you, Maricela. You ruined yourself." I only revealed the truth. Her eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. "Truth?" she hissed. "The truth is, you were too weak to handle this place. You should have handed it over long ago. I would have made something of it. Instead, you clung to it, and now everyone sees you as some kind of martyr. While she broke off, her voice cracking with rage. I took a step toward her, my voice low but steady. "This house was never yours to sell. Your father left it to me. And you knew it. You tried to erase my name, but the walls remember, the neighbors remember, and the papers remember too. You may despise me, but don't mistake your ambition for righteousness." Her lip trembled, though she bit it quickly into stillness. For a moment, silence pressed between us, heavy and suffocating. Then she grabbed her handbag, slinging it over her shoulder with a violent motion. "I don't need your approval," she said coldly. "One day, you'll realize what you cost me." She strode to the door, her heels striking against the wood like a drumbeat. The slam rattled the frame when she left, leaving the house, shivering in her absence. I stood frozen for a moment, listening to the echo fade. Then the weight of it broke over me. My knees weakened, and I sank into the nearest chair. My hands covered my face, and the tears came hot and sudden. Strength had carried me through hearings, through silence, through confrontation. But strength does not erase sorrow. I wept for Walter, for Alma, and now for Maricela, who still lived but felt lost to me. I wept for the family we might have been, for the kindness that ambition had smothered, for the gulf between mother and daughter that no verdict could bridge. When the tears finally ebbed, I wiped my face with the hem of my sleeve and looked around the hollow room. The bare walls stood witness, unchanged, unpitying. The house was safe, secured by law, by proof, by truth. But in that moment, victory tasted bitter, and the silence of the home I had defended pressed hard against me. I rose slowly, walked to the window and stared at the oak tree swaying in the fading light. Its branches stretched wide, steady against the wind. My reflection in the glass was streaked with tears, but behind it, the house still stood waiting for what came next. The ruling came on a gray morning, the kind where clouds pressed low against the mountains and the air smelled faintly of rain. I sat in the courthouse with my hands folded tightly. Walter's letter tucked in my bag, steadying me the way it always did. When the judge's words rang out, the quitclaim deed voided, the property restored in full to Evelyn Moreau. A hush fell over the room. before the murmur of voices rose like wind through trees. Claudine touched my arm, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "It's yours, Eveline. No one can take it now." The clerk handed me the certified copy of the new deed, the paper cool in my fingers, stamped with authority. I stared at my name spelled cleanly, no forgery, no question. It should have felt like triumph, yet the relief came tangled with hollowness. To win meant to expose my daughter's betrayal in full daylight, and the wound of that exposure ran deep. Outside, townsfolk nodded as I passed. Some offered congratulations, others simply pressed my hand. Their support warmed me, but it could not fill the ache left behind. I returned home to the farmhouse, the oak standing sentinel, and spread the documents on the dining table. The deed lay there, unshakable proof. Yet beside it I saw the empty chair where Marisela had once sat, as a girl swinging her legs and asking for another slice of pie. That evening, Claudine stopped by with a folder in hand. "We'll safeguard this," she said, slipping the deed into a protective sleeve. She made me sign a request for digital copies at the clerk's office and insisted we store one in her safe as well. "Paper can burn, Evelyn. Keep it in 3 places and you'll never fear again." I obeyed, though my heart wasn't in it. The practicalities felt weightless against the heaviness inside me. The house was secure. The law was on my side, but no ruling could mend what was torn between mother and child. When Claudine left, I sat at the table long after the dishes were cleared, the deed before me like a victory banner I had no desire to wave. The silence pressed in until I rose and carried the paper upstairs, tucking it into the nightstand beside Walter's letter. One piece of proof from the past, one from the present, both affirming that this home was mine. I stood by the window, the branches of the oak scratching softly against the glass. My chest eased with a slow breath. Yes, the house was safe. Yes, my name was protected. But in the hollow ache of evening, I knew the harder question waited, not what had been saved, but what I would do with it, now that it was truly, indisputably mine. I drew the curtains closed, the deed resting securely in its place, and prepared myself for the choice that lay ahead. For days after the ruling, I walked through the farmhouse as if seeing it for the first time. Each room felt both emptier and fuller. Emptier without the furnishings I had carried away, fuller with the weight of certainty that it was mine. I ran my hand along the stair rail polished by years of touch, stood in the doorway of the kitchen, and sat in the quiet of the parlor. The question pressed against me, should I keep it or should I let it go? Selling crossed my mind more than once. The house held too many shadows, too many echoes of Alma's laughter, Walter's cough, Marisela's fury. I pictured myself in a smaller apartment downtown, free of maintenance, free of memory. But when I lingered at the window and looked out at the oak tree swaying against the sky, I felt my chest tighten with a fierceness I couldn't ignore. This house was not just timber and plaster. It was years of holding fast when everything else fell away. Leaving it would feel like erasing myself. So I chose to remain. Not as a relic, not as a woman frozen in grief, but as someone determined to live. The first act was simple. I cleared the flower beds that had gone, untended my knees sinking into the damp soil as I pulled weeds and planted new blooms. Petunias, marigolds, and lavender soon pushed through color, returning to a garden that had long stood in mourning. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Gertrude stopped by with a basket of scones, nodding at the bright rose. "Good to see life here again," she said, her eyes softening. Mr. Olin offered to mend the back gate, and when he was finished, we shared lemonade on the porch, like old times. It was then I decided the house needed more than flowers, it needed voices. I began hosting small book circles in the living room. We read novels, essays, sometimes Poetry and laughter filled the hollow space where anger had once echoed. I brewed coffee, served cookies, and watched as conversation wove new threads into the walls. What had been a battleground became a gathering place. Evenings grew gentler. The rooms felt less like shrines to loss and more like containers of new beginnings. I caught myself humming while sweeping the porch, smiling when children cut across the yard to chase fireflies. One night, as I set chairs in a circle for the next gathering, I paused at the window. The oak tree stood steady as always, its branches spread wide. The house no longer loomed as a burden. It breathed with me, ready to carry whatever life I chose to place within it. I touched Walter's letter, still safe in the nightstand, and whispered, "We're all right now." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. The house was not a cage nor a monument to pain. It was a home again, waiting for the life I would continue to grow inside it. The spring thaw came early that year. Snow melted from the eaves, leaving rivulets running down the windows, and the garden beds I had replanted began to stir with green. Inside, the house felt lighter than it had in years. Laughter from the book circles still lingered in the air. Neighbors came and went with ease, and the silence that once pressed on me now carried a gentleness. One evening, while putting away linens in my bedroom, I opened the nightstand drawer where Walter's letter and the deed lay. Tucked beside them was a single brass key, its teeth worn smooth from years of use. It was the last spare to the farmhouse, one I had nearly forgotten. I picked it up and felt the cool weight against my palm. I turned it over in my fingers, thinking of Maricela. We had not spoken since her last storming departure. Word reached me through the inevitable current of a small town that she was keeping to herself, her pride still stiff, her anger simmering. I carried no illusions her absence hurt, but her presence had hurt more. I placed the key back in the drawer. I would not throw it away. For me, it was not an invitation, but a reminder. I would not bar my daughter forever. If she wished to come, it would not be with signatures forged or demands shouted across my table. It would be with respect, with humility, with the love that had long gone missing from her words. Until then, the key would stay hidden, silent, waiting. As I closed the drawer, I felt a deep calm settle over me. She had walked into this house once, believing she owned it, believing she could erase me with papers and arrogance. But I remained. I had stood, endured, and reclaimed not just my home, but the steadiness Walter had always seen in me. I walked downstairs, pausing at the window where the oak tree stretched its branches wide against the evening sky. The shadows lengthened across the yard, familiar and steady, like an old friend keeping watch. I whispered into the quiet words, meant as much for myself as for the world beyond. She walked in, believing she owned my house. I walk forward, knowing I own my peace. And with that, I turned from the glass, carrying the peace with me into the life still waiting to be lived. When respect finally knocks, do you savor it alone or open the door to the world?